I think a difference between back then and today is the fact that you have the two incumbent constitutional officers, Judy Bartopinka, the Comptroller, and Dan Rutherford, the Treasurer, that are actually publicly advocating for this. I don't know of any time in the 40 years since this Constitution that we've had the two incumbents actually come out as publicly and actively as we have had this happen. And let me tell you, I think two things. One is the fact that this will save about $12 million. This is an analysis that we put together to understand that. And the second thing is, if government can be more efficient by having less officers and less departments and so forth, then government should do that.
Senator Raoul made some statements about how Illinois used to have a need to have a comptroller and a treasurer, but now that's no longer needed just through advances. Can you explain why there used to be a reason to have two separate offices, and what is it, technology that's changed, or what have you?
There's a couple of things. First of all, the original Constitution of the Constitution of 1970 that separated the two was because of an occurrence that took place in the 1950s, Orville Hodge, and there was some cooking of the books and some money lost. The 1970 Constitution envisioned the fact of having two officers, so you have the check for one person investing the money and the balance for the other person writing the checks. The things that have happened since 40 years ago is, number one, we have an Auditor General of the state of Illinois, which is a constitutionally appointed position that audits the books, so it's not the Comptroller or the Treasurer. And a second thing that occurs today, separate from 40 years ago, is that we've got so much electronic and computerization to cross-reference numbers that back in the days of Orville Hodge, you were still using typewriters, pieces of paper, and pencils.
The Auditor General submitted an audit recently that talked about how the state's financial system is really having some issues as far as communicating across departments, that there's a lot of lacking in technology right now. What of those things might need to be addressed to make the joining of these offices run smoothly?
Well, I think what the Auditor General was referring to was the different agencies communicating amongst themselves. What, for my purposes, I am very sensitive about how the Comptroller and the Treasurer's communications work together, because when we look at fund balances and moving in cash and looking at ways of investments, right now they are good. They perhaps could well be better, but this is something that both Comptroller Topinka and I are definitely looking into.
Have you been in contact with the House about this? How do they feel about this?
Well, that's the big they. I have been in touch with specific members of the House, and they are supportive. I have spoken with the Speaker personally about it. He does have some sensitivities about it. He was on the Constitutional Convention that drafted it to be two separate offices. I've asked the Speaker to please try to, keep an open mind at it. Let's see if we can perhaps at least put it up for a vote, and if we can get 3/5 of a vote to move it on to the public. See, it required a 3/5 vote here in the Senate. It will require a 3/5 vote in the Illinois House. If that occurs, then it goes to the general public on the ballot of November 2012. And if the requisite number of votes come there, then it will go to the ballot of 2014, where we will elect only one position as opposed to two.
What other pushback have you had?
Really none.
So the Speaker had some sensitivities.
Yeah.
Anybody else who's spoken to you about concerns?
I think the only real concern I've had from people was the fact of the check and balance. And I think once you articulate it, it's pretty obvious that the days of 1950s are different for 61 years later.
So the earliest time for implementation is 2014?
And there's still a couple more hurdles to get through before that even gets to the ballot to elect that one constitutional. It has to pass 3/5 of the House, and then it has to go to the ballot in November 2012, because what we're talking about here is actually changing the Constitution of the state of Illinois. And it will require the requisite number of votes in that November. If that occurs, then we will go for the one office then on the ballot of November 2014.
If it does go to that, this is kind of a complicated issue. People don't know what a comptroller does.
Right.
I mean, people don't even know the word. How do you explain it and say, this is a comptroller, this is a treasurer, now this is how they'll be together?
I think you do a very simple one sentence. Two state offices combined into one, period. Pretty simple.
Is that pretty much the extent of the education campaign, to try to get people to actually go to the polls and vote in the vote?
Well, I think that anytime you can talk about downsizing government, making it more efficient, being able to save money in government resonates. And particularly in this time and space that we're dealing with under the Capitol Dome, every nickel and dime that we can bring about in regards to cost savings and greater efficiency is what we should be doing.